Have you ever looked at a mountain and thought, I could carve a face in that? Probably not. Well, what about 4 giant faces? Sounds kind of crazy, right? But it actually happened. Today, we're going to get into the incredible story of how Mount Rushmore was made.
First off, this was not a one-person job. It took a massive team. We're talking 400 workers. A lot of them were miners, so they were used to tough work. But imagine spending years hanging off the side of a mountain with just ropes and tools. That's more people than in most elementary schools, all working on one single sculpture. Just wild.
So that's the big question, right? How on earth did they turn a solid mountain into 4 gigantic, detailed faces? It seems impossible, but they pulled it off. And they did it with some serious skill, a ton of bravery, and, get this, a whole lot of dynamite. Yep, dynamite. Let's break down exactly how they did it. Okay, so before we get to the explosions and the carving, we've got to rewind, because the story of Mount Rushmore, well, it started way before a single tool ever touched that rock. It all began with just a really, really big idea.
And it's super important to understand this part. Before anyone thought about carving presidents into it, this mountain and the land around it, the Black Hills, was sacred to the Lakota Sioux people. This history is a really big piece of the whole story, right from the very start. So let's jump to the 1920s. A historian, a guy named Don Robinson, is looking at these incredible mountains, and he has this wild idea. He thinks, hey, what if we carved massive sculptures right into the rock? His goal was to get tourists to visit from all over, to help the local economy out.
Okay, so the idea is out there. Now they need a real plan. First step, find an artist. But the even bigger question was, whose faces were they going to carve into a mountain for, forever?
The man for the job was a sculptor named Gutzon Borglum. And let me tell you, he had a vision that was way bigger than just a tourist attraction. He said, look, this shouldn't just be about a few local heroes. This monument needs to tell the story of the entire United States.
So how'd they land on these 4 presidents? Well, it wasn't just picking names out of a hat. Each one stood for something huge. You had George Washington, representing the birth of the country. Then Thomas Jefferson, symbolizing its expansion. He made the country way bigger. Then, of course, Abraham Lincoln, for keeping the nation together. And last but not least, Theodore Roosevelt, who stood for development and growth. It's basically a history lesson carved in granite.
Okay, plan, check. Presidents chosen, check. Now for the part you've been waiting for. How in the world do you actually carve a mountain? This is where it gets really loud and really dangerous.
Now, you're probably picturing a guy with a tiny hammer and chisel, right? Nope. Think bigger. Think dynamite. Seriously. Step 1 was to blast away about 90% of the rock with explosives. They were experts, placing it just right to get the rough shape. After that, they drilled tons of holes super close together, kind of like connect the dots on the rock, to weaken it. Then, and only then, did they come in with hand tools for the final, smooth details.
And can you just imagine how tough this job was? These guys were unbelievably brave. Every single day, they'd climb hundreds of feet up, just dangling from ropes. They had to put up with sudden lightning storms, freezing cold, and you always had to worry about falling rocks. It was just exhausting, dangerous work.
So after hearing about the dynamite and dangling from ropes, you're probably expecting me to give you a really sad number. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. Over the entire 14 years of carving, with all that danger, 0 workers died on the job. Not one. For that time period, that is an absolutely incredible safety record. Just amazing.
But just because it was safe doesn't mean it was easy. Oh no. Like any huge project, they ran into some major problems that almost shut the whole thing down for good.
Yeah, this thing was a real roller coaster. For starters, just a few years in, they realized the granite where they were carving Thomas Jefferson was all cracked and unstable. So what do? They had to blast his entire face right off the mountain and start all over again. Then the Great Depression hit and the money just dried up. For years, work would start, then stop, then start again, until finally in 1941, it just stopped.
And here's a crazy fact. Because the work stopped so suddenly, the Mount Rushmore we see today is actually unfinished. Gutzon Borglum's original plan was way bigger. He wanted to carve each president from the head all the way down to their waist, but with no money and World War II starting, the project just had to end, leaving us with the famous faces we all recognize.
So the carving stopped back in 1941, but the story of Mount Rushmore, that definitely didn't end there. Today, how we see it is, well, it's complicated. People look at it in very different ways.
For millions of people who visit, it's this incredible masterpiece of art and engineering, right? A huge symbol of American history. But there's another side to the story. For the Lakota Sioux people, it's a constant, painful reminder that this monument was built on their sacred land that was taken from them when a treaty was broken. It just goes to show you how one single place can mean two very different things.
And that kind of leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it? Mount Rushmore tells one version of America's story, carved into a mountain to last forever. But it makes you think, who gets to decide which stories are told? And what makes a story so important that it deserves to be carved in stone? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me.